Hey guys, Pastor Mike here. So excited that you would tune in and take the time to watch our content on our very own Embassy YouTube channel. In just a few moments, you're going to be witnessing a Zoom call that I had with a few other pastors, and I think it's going to be very encouraging to you as we explore the dangers of cancel culture, and we'll get more into that in just a second. Have a great week, guys. Hey everybody, Pastor Mike, and I'm joined by two other good friends who are also youth pastors, and one is Josh Alvarez on my left, and then we also have Thaddeus Stewart, who I've known for a very long time, and actually you would have been one of kind of my students when we were doing like youth camp stuff back in the day, but.
Yep.
Pastor Josh is a youth pastor at New Life in Brantford, and really cool to have you here with us tonight. And Thaddeus, you are actually youth pastor in Troy, Michigan. So you're a Canadian.
That's right. Got my Blue Jays hat. Got my Raptors shirt on. DeMar represent.
Missed that on a ring by half a year.
That's all right.
Before that we get started on this topic, I'm going to just give Josh the floor and talk about what you're doing in Brantford, your background, two minutes or less, and then I'm going to do the same for Thaddeus right after that. And then we're going to hop into this about the lack of love in cancel culture. Cool?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So I'm Josh Alvarez. I'm pastoring here in Brantford. I'm the youth and worship pastor. It's a brand new thing for me to kind of just take on multiple roles like that. So it's been cool. Like it's been different for sure. But I come from London. That's where I met my wife, Catherine, who is watching TV right now. And I met Pastor Mike as well. We met at a church called Royal View Church. You know what? We're talking to your students. I don't know why I'm saying that.
Yeah. Where's Royal View, everybody?
Hey, let's not take for granted it's a new day, right? So that's good. That's
Yes,
great.
Sir. Yeah, and then for a little bit, I was there. I was leading, was helping out the youth pastor at the time. Ended up going across the city to Gateway Church, where I was leading there as well under Wayne Giroux. Awesome guy to lead under. And then he got me my first youth pastoring job. So yeah,
that's very cool.
Yes, sir.
Wonderful, Thaddeus.
Yeah, and I'm Thaddeus Stewart. Like Mike said a little bit earlier, I'm living currently in Troy, Michigan, which is about 35 minutes from Detroit. Moved here almost exactly 2 years ago, actually, because my wife got a job at a hospital down here, and so I'm currently working at a church, Kensington Church, it's called, and I'm the middle school pastor for Breakaway Youth. Hello.
Breakaway.
And yeah, I didn't name it, by the way. So I've been doing that for almost a year and a half now. My wife and I just had our first baby a couple, 3 months ago, just over 3 months ago. So little Micaiah has been on a tear. But yeah, I met Mike probably around 2006,
2006.
2006 probably at Spring Bay Camp. Represent Spring Bay Camp on Manitoulin Island.
That's the same year I met you.
Yeah, that's right. Because you would have been there. You would have been coming with that crew too. That's right. I forgot about that. Mm-hmm. So we got into some shenanigans back in the day, and we had a good time. But yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Your wife was actually at my church for a long time, eh? That's
right. Her dad was the pastor up until I think 3 or 4 years ago. So
it's a small Pentecostal world, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like the mafia.
Okay. All right. So I've gathered these guys here to talk about something that I think is going to be a good topic, and really is the lack of love in what we call cancel culture. I'm going to take just summarize for students that don't know what cancel culture is. You'll know it maybe not by name, but you will know it by reputation. And what that is cancel culture would be similar to what happened with maybe the Don Cherry thing, maybe the Drew Brees thing for those of you that are sports fans in the youth group, where somebody says something and they really didn't understand that they said was really counter to the culture and everything that's going on. And then what happens is no one, they might, not in Don Cherry's case, but in Drew Brees' case, he actually comes and apologizes, makes a nice statement. I personally believe would be more heartfelt from Drew Brees. And no one lets them really get a word in edgewise. They have either unfriended them, unliked them, or they have lit them up in the comments online and all that kind of stuff. And they are canceled. Their place of influence is really taken from them. They didn't really have a chance to get a word in to be able to defend themselves. There's no defense that can save them at all. They're done. And we've seen this happen in a lot of movie stars right now aren't respected. It's kind of interesting now. YouTubers are really the movie stars are kind of the day now. People that are influencers now are actually called influencers, and they, the people that we have seen back in the day when we were kids on like Wheaties box and all the stereotypical like the cardboard standees and all that kind of stuff. Watching The Last Dance. Michael Jordan back in the day. All those
So
kind of
good.
so good.
Not the goat.
I think we would all agree though that the day of the movie star, the day of that podium is coming to a close and are not respected. And now it's a different, I would say, small G god of the day is kind of the online community. And like Joe Rogan, I do not endorse you to watch his show, but he does have some interesting points when he brings different people on from all different walks of life. And what's interesting is he's not really an advocate for cancel culture at all. He would be more of let's hear the person out, hear their side of the story, and find out why the heck that people are so crazy. And that's what I really think needs to happen more. And because even though that Joe Rogan's not a Christian man at all, and he is more on the not believing in any kind of a God at all. But I think that at the end of the day, he would want to hear somebody out. And I think that that's really the crux of, if you love somebody, you want to hear them out. Yeah, but I want to talk about something I actually just witnessed last night, and we had talked before this, but it's so prevalent right now. There's a guy I know. I'm not going to mention names, even though this is a private chat. And he was commenting on some stuff when it came to, okay, I'll be honest. What he posted was really not smart. Really lacking wisdom in a lot of areas. But this guy is smart. Okay, like he's almost done his doctorate in theology, and he's been through a lot of stuff in his life, but he's not necessarily, he doesn't really understand the online culture. Now, I will read the comments, but here's kind of my thing. If I haven't talked to you in about a year or 2 years, I probably don't have an up-to-date relationship with you. And I'm probably not going to, just for me, I'm probably not going to engage in your conversation. I might do it privately, but definitely not in your comments, because that's just the way I'm wired. However, I'm reading the comments of the post, and it was edgy, but it wasn't out and out brutal. Okay, it was just kind of dumb. Anyway, he's got family members that are saying, "I wish I was never related to you, and I never want to speak to you again," and different things like this. Other people that are involved in ministry that are just like raking the guy over the coals. And if you know this guy and you sat in a room with him, you'd be like, dude, that was dumb, but like, can you just not do that again? And he would probably be like, well, okay, maybe. Oh, sure. Yeah. And this is the thing. It really, it's very taxing on my spirit, even having a Facebook account in these times right now. Everybody seems to be stressed.
100%.
And I was very grieved by this, to see that family members who are Christian people are actually saying, I wish I was never related to you. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. I'm blocking and deleting you. And the worst part about that is as really as meaningless as blocking and deleting is, to me, you could block and delete me all day, and I don't care. because it doesn't mean anything to me. If we got in a room, I guarantee you that we could solve our differences. But what that really means is I've cut you out of my life. You no longer have a platform, and you're pretty much dead to me. And that's not the way of Christ. Like that's a crazy thing. Like I would love you guys to weigh in on maybe a situation that you've seen that would be similar to that, whether it would be, maybe it's in your youth ministry or in your context. I'd love to hear, something that you've seen and add just a couple of comments to that. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I mean, when you look at popular culture and you look at the last several years, I think, I mean, there's so many different options that you could choose from, whether it would be, the cancel culture aiming their anger at like Taylor Swift when that whole thing with her and Kanye went down and all of that drama. You can probably look that up. But there's been like comedians, like I think of Louis C.K., who, there was some really serious stuff that he did that was really inappropriate and wrong.
Yeah.
But just he totally got canceled by culture. People were just outraged. Harvey Weinstein or however you say his name, like that's a big one, which like there's really horrendous things that these people are doing, and probably rightly so. Culture is up in arms saying, hey, you can't do that, and we're going to rise up collectively and cancel you out, whether that is boycotting the movies that they're involved in, or
Sure.
stopping following them on social media platforms, refusing to watch their art or consume their art or whatever. So, I mean, you go down the list of popular culture and there are so many examples of things that people have done that, culture at large has disagreed with, and they turn on them. Now, the problem is, I was reading this article as I was kind of thinking through some of the thoughts pertaining to cancel culture. And there's this article that Vox.com put out. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Vox, VOX. They've got some really interesting things when it comes to popular culture. And one of the things that they were saying in this article was, people think that we're doing this great thing when we as a culture collectively unite against people who have done what we consider to be wrong. Yeah. The reality is cancel culture probably doesn't have as big an impact as we think it does, or we hope it does, because at the end of the day, these celebrities and these, popular culture figures that we are canceling, at the end of the day, have they really lost all that much? Maybe for a cycle of the news, their influence and their popularity takes a hit, but a couple months down the road, there's another story involving somebody else, and by then we've forgotten what that person did. And so I think it's just interesting to see when you look at cancel culture, in terms of like popular culture and things that are happening that we see in the news or entertainment industry. I don't know if cancel culture has nearly the impact that we think it does when we get our hashtags trending, boycott so-and-so, stop listening to this person and that person, blah, blah, blah. So
do you think,
sorry?
Do you think that we sometimes make people infamous by doing it instead? Like some
100%.
people I've never even heard of, all of a sudden they're being canceled, and it's kind of like I'm wearing a WWE hat, but it's kind of like in psychology for the entertainment sport, whatever. It's almost like you're turning that person what they would call heel, making them a bad guy.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. And then so they went from being what they call the good guys, babyface, and then they do something and they bring something out of nowhere, and it's like you're making them popular again, and like you'll see merchandise even go up when it comes to like you'll see all this kind of stuff like Trump. Yeah, love him or hate him, I wonder how much merchandise he's getting, like money merchandise that he's getting, because like he's like loved and hated by everybody, but he's talked about by everybody. And he's almost uncancelable. Like you can't cancel him because he's so infamous and so famous at the same time that there's nothing you can do to get rid of him. Like he's actually the exception to the rule. Like you can't get rid of him at all. So, but I think when it comes to famous people and it comes to those are great examples. I mean, the Harvey Weinstein thing, he's a pretty bad guy, so he kind of deserves that. But then there's these other people that I think that they don't deserve a lot of these things, and if they were talked to in the right context, we might actually hear where they were coming from and maybe see that they were using the wrong language, or they didn't realize the impact of their words, and yada yada yada. And unfortunately, we do this to our family and our friends and coworkers and all this kind of stuff. And Josh, what would you say to weigh in kind of on that? Your take on this?
Yeah, like just to kind of for a second, just to build off of what Thad was saying, is that like there is an endless cycle of hate and resentment when you kind of participate in that, kind of like that mob mentality, right? So kind of just to build off of what Thad was saying, just kind of the idea of cancel culture kind of just being like a cycle. You continue to just kind of just, you know, recycle hate and recycle and recycle. Like you think about what happened with George Floyd, that police officer, Derek Chauvin, like people wanted his head on a stick. Like they were after him. They were outside of his house. This dude was getting skipped the dishes, you know, while people are, you know, making sure that this guy gets what he deserves, right? And then what happens after that? The guy gets sentenced, he gets charged and everything, but they're still outraging, you know? Yeah. Like he's like Thad was saying, like I'm not sure how effective that is, because all across the country you've just upset a bunch of people, and now people are tearing places apart. And hey, listen, I understand it, I see it, I get it, but I'm not sure how effective that is. And to take it to kind of like a church setting, we see it in, like, we not only see it like within our students, we not only see it within people in the church. You know, when they make a mistake, it's like, oh man, did you hear what they did? Did you hear who he was hanging out with? Did you see what place he posted he was at? Wow. Not only do we see that in church, I'm telling you this right now, students, as you're listening, this happens within the circle of pastors.
Wow, absolutely it does.
I was talking, and this happened to me literally the other day. Like I was talking to another pastor, and I was like, hey, like, you think this person's blacklisted? Like, this happens. Yeah. Like this for real happens. And we kind of just, man, we go against everything that we're preaching, because we're like, man, yeah, let's blacklist this person. There's no redeeming themselves. Yeah. And we never know when somebody was maybe just in a dark place. We never know, maybe they were just struggling and nobody knew, and we never gave them a chance to kind of redeem themselves.
Well,
yeah.
People,
is it cool if I jump in there, Mike?
Yeah, jump in, go for it.
Because I think it's interesting, because a lot of times when we start looking at these things like cancel culture, we're looking at it from the perspective of the world that we live in. And that's a dangerous game to play, because the reality is, like, scripture tells us that we're citizens of heaven. And so while we very much find ourselves living in a present and physical kingdom of the world, we can't allow ourselves to be looking at those things from that perspective, because that's not the perspective that we've been created for. We've been created with the perspective of the kingdom of heaven in mind, and that we're invited and we're called to join the mission of Jesus to help usher the kingdom of heaven here on earth. So we're looking at at all of these things like cancel culture, and saying, like, this person deserves this and deserves that, and you know, I hear so many times, I hear Christians who are saying, like, karma will get you, and it's like, karma's not a thing. Like, that's something that the church and sometimes has adopted and taken in. What?
You brought New Age into church, right? Like,
yeah.
you brought New Age into church, and to kind of add to that, dude. But I think that, to be honest, you would think that you're preaching to the choir here with the three of us and other people, but the problem is the choir's ill-equipped. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue, is that the choir has been hired instead of actually brought into the fold. So the choir needs to be preached to more than ever, but the choir thinks that they should be the ones preaching. And that's the thing, and they can't, and it's because Jesus is a really nice philosophy, and we I know this is very cryptic, and for students that don't know what Christ consciousness is, it's very wrong. And Jesus is not this nice philosophy and ideology. He's the person of peace, right? Like he is
the
a
way,
real,
the truth, and the
yeah.
life.
We have nothing if it's not for his sacrifice on the cross. Like there's no other way to heaven except by him, right? And this is the thing that we forget. We like to think, I think all of us, that this culture is the be all and end all that we are in, and then we adapt and we try to mold and fit the ideas that are good natured ideas, and that's going to save people, and it won't save people. And we try to, I would say that there's more Christians that are New Agers than they are actually Christians when it comes to their theology. And I don't think it's anything that people have done on purpose, but I think that as leaders, because I think that we're all leaders, we should be all leaders, really. How can we actually move forward and combat cancel culture when it comes to being a Christian, being a Christ follower in our context, right? Like, you're not going to win by trying to break it up. We know that. I'll give one example of how I kind of figured out in the past a little bit that Ellen DeGeneres, for instance, okay? Well, you would think that she's the most woke person on the face of the earth, because she kind of is.
Yeah.
She kind of is. And just because she didn't respond quick enough, she was borderline canceled. In fact, I saw YouTubers now picking her comedy apart. And she's probably one of the most giving people on the planet, actually. Like, she's incredibly loving. Great example for the church to follow that way. We got to pick it up.
Yeah,
I love what she does. Honestly, like I think that we need to do much better at that. But there's a great example of almost on the brink of being canceled. And she's woke. Like, she gets up in the mornings like, I woke up. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know, bad dad joke.
Oh.
Happy Father's Day. But you guys get
I'm gonna
what
cancel
I'm saying.
that joke.
Cancel the joke. But you guys get what I'm saying. Like, there's a great example of somebody that is incredibly giving and loving, and her whole end of her show is, remember, be kind to people. Wow. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing that we could learn to implement even in our meetings as, youth pastors and stuff.
Right.
If we're not kind. But what are some practical, I like practical. What are some practical ways that we could actually stop cancel culture in its tracks? Because I think it does start with a person, right? What do you guys think? Weigh in on that.
Well, I think one thing that we can do to help combat cancel culture, if that's the way you want to put it, but from the church, is I think we need to recognize that we're all playing at the same level. There's a level playing field, because the reality is we're all sinners. I think of the story of the woman who was caught in adultery, and she's brought before Jesus, and these Pharisees and these religious leaders are like, Jesus, what do we do with her? Like, the law says that we should stone her. What do you say? And he starts drawing in the sand, and he starts kind of making them a little uncomfortable because he's not really saying anything. And then he says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
That's so good, man.
And it says one by one, starting with the oldest, because they were probably a little bit more wise than some of the younger dudes in the crowd. But starting with the oldest, one by one, they left until it was just Jesus and the woman. And Jesus says to her, like, where are your accusers? And She says, they're gone. And he says, all right, go and sin no more. And the reality is we are all sinners. And I know there's stuff in my life, I'm guessing and guaranteeing there's probably stuff in both of your guys' lives that is not up to the standard that God calls us to. And we need to recognize that there needs to be this grace lens that we look through. Doesn't mean that there's not consequences. Like I even think of Paul, before Paul starts his ministry, we read that he goes off into the wilderness for, like, a lot of scholars think 3 years. And maybe it even says in the Bible, I forget. But like Paul was murdering Christians before he was one. And he like has to go off and
There's a cooling off period.
Yeah, there's
Wow.
a period of time where Paul had to kind of check out of society for a bit so that he could get right with God, he could learn.
Interesting.
But then he comes back. So I think we need to recognize that we're all coming from the same place of brokenness and sin,
Wow.
and we're all going to mess up. And so that doesn't mean that we can't. That doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. That doesn't mean that there are going to be times that we're going to have to face the consequences of our actions.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there is grace, and we need to make sure that we're looking through that lens first. So I think just recognizing the playing field has been leveled right from the start.
I want to add to that for 2 seconds, and I want Josh just to talk on this because I know he's got to go soon. But that's interesting. God is anti-cancel culture himself. Prime example to go along with what you're saying is Cain was marked for the rest of his life. So no one was allowed to kill him, right? So there's the example. So he goes around marked for the rest of his life. He killed his own brother, knowing that he did wrong. But no one's allowed to cancel his life out. If you did that, God was going to cancel them out because he was marked, right? Like, you don't mess with him. He's still mine. He messed up. Like, isn't that interesting? That's an interesting and with the cool off thing, I think that's huge.
Moses too. Moses was a murderer, runs away, cools off for 40 years in the desert, comes back, like crazy.
Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it does help. That's an important thing. Like, that's really good. Josh, what do you have to say, man?
Well, before I start, I have this.
I'm so glad I went first.
It was good.
Sorry, man.
It's the confirmation of the Spirit of God, gentlemen.
There you go, man.
So good.
I want to say this is that for anyone to actually participate in cancel culture, they're actually participating in sin versus God. Like, the reason why I say that is I think about the story when Jesus is kind of doing like a series on like a hot seat or whatever, kind of a Q&A, and Pharisees are coming at him, people that are supposed to be well educated, and they're coming at him with these questions, like trying to basically get him to say something that will get him killed, right?
Yeah.
That'll get him arrested. And one after another, he just shuts them down. Eventually the Sadducees come, the guys that are like the bosses, right? Like when you get to like the end of a level or whatever, it's these guys that think that they're the smartest and they're smarter than Jesus. They try to outsmart him, and they ask him a question. They say, "What is the greatest commandment?" And he says to them, the greatest commandment is to love your Lord with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, right? And then this is the beautiful thing is he says, and the second is like it. And if you actually go to like the Greek translation, like the word that he uses, like it he's basically saying like this is equal to the first commandment,
Right.
The second commandment, this is just as important. I want you to love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, everything, but I want you to love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And when he's talking neighbor, he's not talking like your next door neighbor, the person that you've done like porch drop-offs to. He's talking somebody that looks like you, and not the color of your skin, not the people that you hang out with, a human being.
Yeah.
If they're a human being, you need to be loving them just like you love yourself. And I think that when we participate in that, it's sin, like it's sin against God.
It is.
Yeah. I think a lot of times, like that was saying, like we're afraid to screw up. We're afraid to screw up because like kind of like the woman that was caught in adultery, like we afraid to be bunched in with her. We are afraid to be exiled, like people like with people like Drew Brees, with people like Candace Owens. Like we don't want to be, we don't want to be ex-nayed like these people.
Yeah.
And we forget that the actual the Bible cover to cover is a giant, very long redemption story. And within that story, within that redemption story is a bunch of subplots about redemption. You know, the woman caught in adultery, the woman at the well, the Zacchaeus, the dude that basically cheated people and he had the worst reputation,
Yeah.
the guy that stole money from people, that was greedy. He says, hey, if you just give them a chance, if you give these people a chance and let them redeem themselves, watch what I could do with them. Zacchaeus ends up being a generous person. How does that happen? You know, like he actually repays people more than he actually stole from them. So I think that we need to remember that the Bible is a giant redemption story with redemption stories within the redemption story. And for us, we need to allow ourselves, one, to be humble enough to screw up and know that there's redeeming after that. And two, we need to be for God's people. We need to be for people and say, man, like there's a chance that they can actually be okay after this and actually prove us wrong. I bet you some of the best pastors that you've seen out there, they've probably had the biggest screw ups.
It's true. That's a great call, and it's image bearer, right? Like that's what it's talking about. It's all image bearing stuff, and I think I was talking with you about this yesterday, Josh, and then I think we'll close. We'll kind of end with that, and then after maybe it will take 2 minutes to kind of talk a debrief, just us. But man, I think about Adam and Eve. They weren't white people, you know, like that's
nobody in the Bible was.
but what I'm saying for us on the call here, they're depicted as it. We grew up that way, but imagine every culture in the world blended into one human being, and that's what we get. Wow.
Ephesians 2, new humanity.
Just incredible, right? Like, so love my neighbor. I don't agree with how they do certain things, or I don't agree with, what car they drive or whatever. I've got all these different ideas of what I agree with, what I don't, and I'm just waiting for something that I can jump on and take the emphasis off my own garbage so that I can get in there and make myself feel better. And here's the I think, in closing thought here, I think we want to get rid of sin, and that's why cancel culture is appealing to be part of, because it takes all of the pointers on somebody else, and then we can stop thinking about how much we've screwed up. And I also think that's why we don't like to talk about biblical stuff anymore, even in our church culture. And we want to cancel the Bible and use cancel culture on the Bible in so many different areas, because we want to get rid of that word that we can't deal with because it's in all of us, and that's sin. And I think that if we would humble ourselves and get on our knees and ask the Lord to forgive us every day, because we mess up every day, we screw up every day, and we would just show some humility and understand that the imperfect person that I'm picking apart, if I actually lowered my brightness on my screen, I would see that that's just me. And I think we need to be really careful and show some love and some grace to people that don't deserve it, just like we don't deserve it. So I appreciate you guys coming on the call and really shedding some light on that. Thanks, guys, for joining us, and we will see you next week on our YouTube channel. Check back every Saturday for new content, and also check these guys out as well. I'm going to put their youth group headers and stuff like that down below, and you check them out on Instagram and all that fun stuff. Anyway, guys, have a great night, and we'll talk later. Awesome.
See ya.